Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of Parker's Tutorials. On this episode I was commissioned by my friend Nathan, who lives in Portland, Oregon, to build a cat puppet for his latest music video. Now, I didn't really know anything about building a puppet from scratch, so it was a pretty big learning experience for me. It doesn't necessarily have to be a cat, it can be any animal. He just needed a cat for his purposes. Alright, that's enough of me jabbering away. Let's start the tutorial. For this project, the first thing I did was draw the basic outline of a cat in a profile on a sheet of cardboard. I then drew the places where I wanted supports to be, which I built using corset boning. I made various size rings with the corset boning using the profile drawing as a size reference. The corset boning will be the basic outer skeleton of the puppet. I cut up and used more corset boning for a spine and on the front rings for support. After creating the basic structure, I measured and cut 1/2-inch thick foam sheeting and hot glued it around the structure, like so. I used a hacksaw to cut a styrofoam sphere in half, and then used my hands to crush the styrofoam to resemble the form of a feline head. I used more corset boning and foam to position the head in place, and connected it to the main body. I also used foam to create a lower jaw for the puppet. Using more foam, I created a bottom section that I attached to the middle support section. After I had a basic structure, I used more foam to cover gaps and holes in the puppet. I also glued cardboard pieces on the top and bottom roofs of the mouth. I then made ears using cardboard and glued them into place with a lot of hot glue. After that, I used cardboard and made a disc with a hole inside that I glued to the bottom of the puppet. This is where the operator's arm will go. The next step was to cover the puppet in fur. For the head, I used pieces of paper to create stencils. Then I traced them on the back of the fur and cut out pieces that were slightly bigger and hand-stitched them together. After realizing that you could see the green foam under the fur, I decided to paint all the visible foam with white water-based paint. I used acrylic, which was a big mistake because I made the foam too stiff. After the paint dried, I continued to cover the puppet in fur. I draped the fur over the puppet to figure out what kind of shapes I wanted to use. This part kind of took a while. After cutting out all the shapes, I began to hand sew the pieces together like a puzzle. The key is to sew the seams on each side with the fabric inside out, so that when you flip it right side out, the seams will be somewhat hidden. Next, I used a combination of superglue and hot glue to cover the puppet in more fur, and using smaller pieces of fur to cover bad seams and smaller things, like the jaw. I used the same process as I did with the body, tracing it on the fur, sewing it together, and flipping it inside out. Then I hot glued the fur onto the ears. I folded over the excess fur at the bottom and hot glued it to the cardboard base. At first I attempted to make my own eyes using glass marbles and paint, but completely failed, so I just bought some stuffed animal eyes at the local craft store. I used Sculpey to create eye sockets that fit the animal eyes and inner ear linings and baked them in the oven. After they were dry, I then used acrylic paint to paint everything white. I hot glued the eye sockets in place by cutting slits in the fur where the eyes would be, and then gluing the eye sockets under the fur in place. I then glued the stuffed animal eyes into the eye sockets. For detailing, I cut small strips of fur and hot glued them on the base of the ears to hide the seams and above the eyes to blend the seams and create a more natural look. I cut a nose out of some thin leather and painted it pink, as well as the base of the ear fading to white. I used dark gray acrylic paint mixed with water and brushed specific areas of the puppet, then wiping it away with paper towels. The paint is working to blend the seams together and create various textures. I got some paint on the eyes, so I used a wet paper towel to wipe off the paint from the glass eyes so that they'd be more shiny. I then went over the cat with more paint mixed with water to try and make the cat more realistic. Now that we have the body done, it's time to build the tail and the front legs. For the tail, I used armature wire and cut a piece the length of the tail. I cut this into sections, and using small squares of cardboard and hot glue, I sandwiched each of the wires between the cardboard. Continue this until you have a full-length tail. I laid this on a piece of 1/2-inch foam sheet and cut a shape that was slightly wider and longer than the skeletal structure. Repeat this a second time and then sandwich the wire skeleton between the foam strips, like so. I used scissors to sculpt the square tail into a round tail, and then I went around the edges and secured the foam together with superglue and hot glue. Then traced the tail on white fur twice. I decided to cut these pieces out as one piece so that the tail would only have a seam on one side. I hand sewed the edge of the tail inside out and then flipped it right side out. For the legs, I sculpted them out of foam and attached a foam paw at the bottom. I covered them with a layer of white paper towels as a base cover, and then measured and did the same thing using the fur. I used the paper towel method for the tail as well. I attached the legs to the body using hot glue and super glue, and used extra fur to hide the seams and make the transitions more organic. I covered the paws with paper towels and fur and hot glued them on the legs as well. Then, using more gray paint mixed with water, I brushed the cat more and wiped off with a paper towel. I attached the tail using super glue and used paint on that as well. After that, I gave the cat a trim using some scissors, painted on some details, and after that, you have a completed puppet. Here are some shots of the finished puppet, and here's a shot of it in action. All right, everyone, that about wraps up this episode of Parker's Tutorials. Thank you to everyone who continues to watch and like videos and comment down below. It really gives me the motivation that I need to continue making these videos. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And if you want, you can hit the little bell to be notified of all my future uploads. All right, everyone, I will see you next time on Parker's Tutorials. Bye.